That's a habit of mine and I won't apologize for it. I count things. Always have. Head of cattle, fence posts, the days till the first frost, the dollars in the strongbox at the bank in Halloran. My late wife, Sarah, used to say I'd count the stars if the Lord held still long enough to let me, and she said it laughing, but she wasn't wrong. There is a little leather tally book I keep in my breast pocket, soft as a glove now from 12 years of handling, and there isn't much that happens in my day that doesn't end up scratched into it in pencil. Numbers don't lie to a man. People do. Weather does. But a column of figures will look you straight in the eye every time. So when I came over the last low rise and saw the place, the first thing my mind did, before I'd even reined Duke to a walk, was count. 5. 5 children scattered across that dirt yard like seed thrown by a careless hand. A boy of maybe 10 splitting kindling with an axe too big for him, the blade going in crooked. 2 little ones, twins by the look of them, squatting in the dust over something I couldn't see. A girl near grown, 12, 13, coming up from the dry creek bed with a yoke across her shoulders and 2 buckets that swung nearly empty. And on the step in a basket, something small enough that it could only have been a baby. 5 children, 1 shack, no man. I made the count and then I made the second count, the one I didn't want to make, the one a cattleman makes without meaning to. 1 milk cow, ribs you could play like a washboard. A garden patch gone brown. A chicken coop with the door hanging open and nothing inside it but feathers and the memory of chickens. A water barrel I'd have bet my hat was bone dry. These people were not living out here. They were drowning very slowly, and they had been for some time. I reached into my coat and touched the paper anyway. It was a clean piece of business, you understand. I want to be honest about how I saw it that day, before I tell you how I saw it after, because a man who pretties up his own sins isn't worth listening to. Tom Calder had borrowed against this land 3 winters back, $400, taken from me directly, not from the bank, because the bank wouldn't touch a quarter section this far out on a man with no stock and a head full of schemes. I'd lent it because Tom Calder could make you believe in him across a card table, and because I had $400 I wasn't using, and because, I'll say it plain, because lending to a desperate man on hard terms is how a rich man stays a rich man, and I'd long since stopped pretending otherwise. The note had come due in September. Tom Calder hadn't paid it. Tom Calder, I'd been told in Halloran, was dead, thrown from a horse out near the Guadalupe and buried where he fell, which is to say not buried at all in any way that would comfort a widow. And the law, such as it was out here, said that the land and everything fixed to it now belonged to Elias Vance. That's me, Elias Vance, the rich rancher who arrived. I had ridden out to look at what was mine. The girl with the buckets saw me first. I watched something move across her face that I've thought about a great many times since, a kind of weary calculation far too old for her years, the look of someone doing sums they've done before and don't like the answer to. A rider, a stranger, a good horse and a good coat. Out here, a man like that almost never meant good news. She set the yoke down slow, never taking her eyes off me, and she said something low to the boy with the axe. He stopped splitting wood and stood up straight and held that axe a little differently. And then the door of the shack opened and the woman came out. I'll tell you what I noticed, in the order I noticed it, because the order matters. I noticed she was thin in the way that frightens you, not slender, thin, the cheekbones starting to show through, the wrists like a bird's. I noticed her dress had been a good dress once, and had been mended so many times the mending had its own mending. I noticed her hair was pinned up neat, every strand of it, and I understood without being told that this was a woman who had decided that whatever else the world took from her, it would not take her standing up tidy, and that the neatness of that hair was the last flag of a fort that had otherwise fallen. And then I noticed the rifle. She held it across her body the way you'd hold a baby you were afraid of dropping. Both hands, knuckles pale, the barrel pointed somewhere off to my left at the empty sky. She did not know how to use it. Anyone could see that. A man who's handled guns his whole life can read another person's hands on a stock the way he reads a horse's ears. And her hand said, "I have never fired this, and I am praying to God I won't have to, and I will if I must." "That's far enough," she said. I stopped Duke a good 30 feet off, held my hands where she could see them, loose on the horn. "Ma'am," I said. "Whatever it is," she said, "we don't want it and we can't pay for it, so you can turn that fine animal around." The baby in the basket on the step started to fuss. The girl with the buckets drifted over to it without being told, the way you do a thing you've done 1,000 times, and gathered it up, and the fussing stopped. None of the children spoke. The twins had stood up out of the dust and pressed themselves against the wall of the shack, 4 wide eyes and 2 dirty faces. The boy with the axe hadn't moved. I have ridden into a lot of yards in my life. I have never in my life felt the thing I felt in that one, which was the particular weight of being the most dangerous thing for 50 miles, and knowing that every soul in front of you knew it too. "My name's Vance," I said. "Elias Vance. I run the 3 rivers north of here." Something flickered when I said the name. She knew it. Out here everyone knew it. The 3 rivers ran better than 9,000 head, and I owned the only deep well between the shack and the town. And I watched her do the arithmetic, watched her understand that the rider in her yard was not a drifter or a drunk but something worse, a man with a claim. "You knew my husband," she said. "It wasn't a question." "I did, ma'am. I was sorry to hear it." "Were you?" I'll be honest, I had a speech. I'd made it before to other people in other yards, and it was a fair speech and a true one. The notes come due. The land's mine by law. I'll give you fair time to gather your things, and I'll even haul them to town for you free of charge, more than most men would do. I had it ready behind my teeth. I'd said it so many times it had worn smooth. I opened my mouth to say it. And the smallest of the twins, a little girl I'd learned, named Pell, chose that exact moment to ask her mother, in a whisper that carried in the dead quiet air the way only a child's whisper can, "Mama, is he the man who's gonna take the house?" I have made a study, over the years, of the moment a person stops being able to hold a thing up. I've seen it in men at the cattle pens when the price comes in low, and they realize they've hauled their whole year's work 300 miles to lose money on it. I've seen it in a poker game. The half-second a man understands the hand is gone. It's a small thing mostly. A loosening around the eyes. A breath that goes out and doesn't quite come all the way back in. I saw it in Naomi Calder when her daughter asked that question. She didn't cry. I want to be clear about that because I think you're expecting her to cry, and she didn't, not then, not for a long time after, and that was somehow worse than crying. What she did was lower the rifle. Just let the barrel sink toward the dirt slow, like the strength to hold it level had been the very last strength she had and the question had spent it. She looked at the little girl, and then she looked at me, and the look she gave me was not anger and it was not pleading. It was the flat, exhausted look of someone setting down a load they have carried alone for so long that they've forgotten it isn't simply part of their body. "Yes," she said, to the child, not to me, "maybe he is." And then she turned and walked back into the shack, and left me sitting on my horse in the yard with 5 children, and no idea on God's earth what to do next. I told myself I'd water Duke and go. That was the lie I told myself, and it had the shape of a kindness, which is how the best lies always fit. I'd water the horse. Even a rich man's horse gets thirsty, and I'd have a look at the place a man's supposed to look at his own property. And then I'd ride back to Halloran and have Coombs the lawyer send the proper papers out by post, and I wouldn't have to stand in that yard while those children looked at me like I was the wolf at the edge of the firelight. That was the plan. It was a coward's plan, and I knew it was a coward's plan, and I dismounted to carry it out. The water barrel was dry. I'd been right about that. Dry and cracked down one stave useless. The well, there was a well hand dug, the windlass rope frayed to a thread. I dropped the bucket and heard it hit mud a long way down. Not water. Mud. They'd been hauling from the creek, and the creek I'd crossed it coming in was barely a wet streak between the stones. I stood there at that dead well, holding a frayed rope, and I did a thing I do, which is I took out my little book and my pencil to write the day's figures, because that is what I do at the end of a thing. I make my count, and I close my column, and I move on. I got as far as the date, October 31st, and I sat there with the pencil on the paper, and I could not for the life of me think what number to write down. $400, that was the number that belonged in the book. $400 and the interest, call it $460 by now. That was what I was owed, and that was the figure that made sense of the day. But the pencil wouldn't move because some other set of figures had got into my head and crowded the right ones out, and the figures in my head were these: 5 children, 1 milk cow gone to bone, a well full of mud, a baby, a girl of 13 doing a grown woman's work, and a boy of 10 holding an axe like a soldier. And no man, and no money, and no water, and winter 6 weeks off. I have done sums my whole life, and there was no sum that made those 2 columns balance. The boy came and stood near me while I was looking down the well. He didn't say anything for a while. He'd left the axe by the woodpile, and I noted that he'd decided I wasn't a thing he needed the axe for, and I found I cared more about that small judgment than I'd have expected to. "There's water down there," he said finally. "Just not enough rope. Pa was gonna dig it deeper." Was he? He was gonna do a lot of things. The boy said it without any particular bitterness, which is the kind of thing that takes the wind out of you worse than bitterness would. A child reciting the things his father had been gonna do. He said when his ship came in we'd have a proper house, with a floor that wasn't dirt. I looked at the shack. Sod roof, mud walls, and through the open door I could see the floor he meant. Packed earth, swept clean, swept, I noticed, swept clean in a house that was losing every other fight but earth. "What's your name, son?" "Joe." "You're the man of this place now, Joe." He thought about that with a seriousness that I have not been able to forget. He didn't puff up at it, and he didn't shrink from it. He just considered it, the way you'd consider a job somebody'd offered you, weighing whether you could do it. "I reckon I have to be," he said. I closed my little book and put it back in my pocket, and I did not write down any number at all, which I will tell you is the first time in 11 years I'd let a day go by uncounted. She fed me supper. I didn't ask her to. I'd have ridden off. I'd half got my foot in the stirrup when she came to the door and said, in a voice scraped clean of everything but plain duty, "You watered your horse off our well. I won't have it said a Calder took a man's kindness and gave nothing back. There's beans. It isn't much." It wasn't much. I want to tell you exactly how much it wasn't, because I have eaten at the tables of cattle barons and senators, and I have never once been as ashamed of my own full belly as I was at Naomi Calder's table that night. It was beans. A pot of beans and cornbread, and that was the whole of it, and I watched her serve it out, and I watched her do the thing that broke me, though I didn't let it show because a man doesn't let it show. She served the children first, generous, real portions, and then she served me, the stranger, the wolf, a portion just as generous, because pride and decency are sometimes the same stubborn animal. And for herself she scraped what was left, which was not enough to feed a sparrow, and she sat at the head of her own table, and she did not eat it. She moved it around the bowl with her spoon so the children would think she was eating, and she watched them eat, and on her face was the only thing I saw all day that looked like happiness. The plain animal satisfaction of a mother watching her young get fed, even at the cost of her own going hungry. I have 9,000 head of cattle. I did the count, sitting at that table. 9,000 head, and the deepest well in the county, and a strongbox in Halloran, and a house with a wooden floor and glass in the windows, and a woman's grave out back that I'd had carved in marble hauled up from San Antonio because I could afford to, because money was the one grief I'd never had to feel. And this woman across the table from me was starving herself so that 5 children could have beans, and she had set a place for the man who'd come to take her roof. The little one Pell fell asleep before she'd finished eating, just tipped sideways against her twin, and the older girl, Tess, the one with the buckets, the one who carried the baby and hauled the water and did the sums in her head about strange riders. Tess gathered her up without a word and carried her to the back of the shack, and I watched a 13-year-old girl mother her own sister to bed, and I thought about my Sarah, and the child we'd lost, who would have been near Pell's age now. And I had to look at my beans for a while. Naomi Calder walked me out to my horse when it was full dark. The stars were out, and I'll tell you, I did not count them, Sarah. I swear I didn't. And the cold was coming down off the high country the way it does, that dry knife-edge cold that promises worse, and we stood by Duke and neither of us said anything for a minute. Then she said, "You'll send the papers, I expect." I didn't answer right away. "I've got people in Ohio," she said, into my silence, and I understood she was telling me her plan, the plan she'd worked out for after, because a woman like that always has a plan even when the plan is only a thinner kind of despair. "My sister. It's a far way with 5 children and no money for the railroad, but we'll manage it, people do." She pulled her shawl tighter. "I'd be obliged if you give us till the spring. The baby's too small for winter travel. If you give us till the grass comes up, I'd—" And here her voice did something, the first crack I'd heard in it all day, a single hairline fracture quickly mortared over, "I'd be in your debt." In your debt. The phrase a person uses without thinking, and it landed on me like a hand laid flat against my chest, because debt was the very thing that had brought me here. Debt was the paper in my coat. Debt was the whole architecture of my prosperity. And this woman with nothing was offering to add herself to the ledger of what she owed me, in exchange for the mercy of not freezing her children to death on a wagon road in January. I got up on my horse. I had to. I couldn't stand in that yard another minute and remain the man I'd been when I rode into it. "Mrs. Calder," I said, and my voice came out strange to me, lower than I meant it. "What was the floor going to be when your ship came in, the proper house? What kind of floor?" She looked up at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. "Pine," she said. "He promised me pine board, sanded smooth, a breath. It's a foolish thing to want." "No," I said, "it isn't." And I turned due north toward home with the debt paper still in my coat, unspoken, unserved, and $460 I was owed. And for the second time in one day I rode away from a column I could not bring myself to close. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I want to be truthful about that. A lesser story would have me riding off into the dark already a changed man with a plan in my heart. I wasn't, and I didn't. I rode off confused and ashamed and angry, mostly at myself, and somewhere in the cold dark between her place and mine, I caught myself doing the thing I do, the only thing I've ever really known how to do. I was counting board feet of pine, length and width of a one-room shack, how many planks it'd take to floor it, how much a man would pay to have them hauled out from the mill at Halloran, and how little that money was, set against 9,000 head and a marble stone over an empty side of a grave. I want that counted against me because it counts against me. 9 days. I have the number exact, because I started writing in the book again the morning after. I couldn't not. A man can't just stop being what he is. And every one of those 9 mornings I opened to October's page and saw the date I'd left blank, that one white gap in 11 years of figures. And every one of those 9 days I closed the book and went about my business and told myself the woman and her 5 children were not my business at all. My business was 9,000 head and a fall gather that had gone long. My business was a steer that had got down in the river mud and had to be hauled out with 3 men and a rope. My business was a fence the antelope had broke through up on the north line, and a hand named Dobie who'd taken to drink and had to be let go, and the price of beef coming in soft out of Kansas City. A man with a ranch the size of mine does not get to ride around the country giving away pine board to widows. That's how a man with a ranch the size of mine stops having a ranch at all. Sarah used to say I had a head for figures and no head at all for the things figures were supposed to be for, and I'd laugh. And she was the only person on this earth who could say a thing like that to me and have me laugh. She'd have ridden back the next morning. Sarah, she'd have loaded the wagon herself. On the 9th day, Coombs came out from town. Coombs is my lawyer. He is a small, neat gray man who looks like a ledger that learned to walk, and I say that with respect, because a man in my position needs a Coombs the way a man needs a good dog, to do the work he hasn't the stomach to do himself. He rode out to the Three Rivers on a hired mare because Coombs does not own a horse. Coombs owns paper, and he sat in my front room on the chair he always sits in, and he laid a folder on his knee. "The Calder quarter section," he said. I didn't say anything. "You rode out to it. Dobie mentioned it before Coombs cleared his throat. "I've drawn the papers. It's clean, Elias, cleaner than most. The note's well past due, there's no other lien, and with Calder dead, there's no man to contest it. The widow's got no standing. You sign, I file in Halloran, and the land's yours free and clear by the new year. 900 acres with creek frontage." "Creek's near dry," I said. "In a dry year. Coombs has a way of looking at you over his spectacles that has won him more arguments than the law ever has. Elias, I'll say the thing you're not saying because that's what you pay me for. Bram Hollies has been asking after that quarter." I felt that land. I won't pretend I didn't. Bram Hollies runs the Lazy H to the east of me, and Bram Hollies and I have spent 20 years being polite to each other across a property line. We'd both happily move at the other's expense. And the thought of Bram Hollies getting his hands on creek frontage that pinched in toward my own water, that landed in me the way a thing lands in a man who has spent his whole life making sure he ends up on the long side of every deal. "Hollies can't have it," I said. "It's mine to take." "It is, so take it." Coombs spread his small, clean hands. "Sign, and it's done, and Hollies can go whistle. The only thing standing between you and that creek is a signature and a widow you don't owe a thing to." He had it exactly right. That was the trouble. He had it exactly right, and there was a version of me, the version that had ridden out there 9 days before with the paper in my coat, who'd have signed it standing up and poured Coombs a whiskey to seal it. I looked at the folder on his knee. I thought about the floor. "Leave the papers," I said. "I'll read them tonight." Coombs knows me. He's known me a long time. He looked at me a moment longer than he needed to, and something passed behind those spectacles that I didn't like, because it was the look of a man recalculating an estimate. And then he set the folder on my table and stood and brushed the trail dust off his neat gray knees. "There's a hard winter coming," he said at the door. He didn't say it unkindly. He said it the way he says everything, like a fact entered in a column. "Sentiment's an expensive habit out here, Elias. I've watched it ruin better men than Bram Hollies." He rode off on his hired mare. I read the papers that night by the lamp at my own wooden table, on my own pine floor, sanded smooth. I noticed for the first time in 12 years, sanded smooth. And I did not sign them, and I did not write a single figure in my book. I loaded the wagon myself in the gray before dawn. Pine board from the stack behind the bunkhouse, enough to floor a one-room shack with a little over for a step. A keg of nails. A coil of good rope, long enough for a deep well. I'd measured the drop in my head a dozen times those 9 days. That's a thing my head does whether I ask it to or not. A sack of seed corn and a sack of beans and a side of bacon, and a sack of flour and another of meal, and 4 laying hens in a crate that complained the whole way out, and a milk goat tied behind because a goat will live on this country where a cow starves. And I knew that, and Tom Calder hadn't, which was the difference between Tom Calder and me boiled down to one animal. I told my foreman I was going to look at some land. That was true. It just wasn't all of the truth, and I'd had 9 days to learn that the space between true and all of the truth is exactly the size of a man's cowardice. I came over the low rise a little after noon, and I saw the place again, and this time I didn't count the cattle or the well or the brown garden. This time the boy, Joe, saw the wagon, and I watched him stand up off the woodpile and shade his eyes, and I watched him recognize the horse before he recognized the man, and I watched him turn and run for the shack shouting something. And by the time I pulled the wagon into the yard, they were all out, all five, and Naomi in the doorway, and the rifle nowhere in sight, which told me more about what 9 days of waiting for the papers had done to her than any words could have. She came across the yard slow. Her eyes went to the wagon, to the board, the kegs, the sacks, the complaining hens, the goat. I watched her read it the way she'd read me that first day, quick, exhausted, doing the arithmetic, and I watched her arrive at the wrong answer, the only answer that made sense in the world she lived in. "We can't pay for any of that," she said, flat, already bracing. "I told you that the first day. I don't know what game." "It's not for paying," I said. "Everything's for paying." She said it like a law of nature, which out here it mostly is. "Mr. Vance, I have got nothing in this world but those 5 children and what little dignity the Lord's left me, and I will not have you unload that wagon and then tell me what it costs, because I have heard that kind of arithmetic before, and it always ends with a woman owing more than she can ever." "Mrs. Calder," I got down off the wagon. I stood in front of her in the dust with my hat in my hands, and I made myself say the thing, the true thing, all of it. "I rode out here the first time to take your land. I had the papers in my coat. I'd have served them on you that afternoon if your little girl hadn't asked you a question I couldn't sit there and listen to. I'm not a good man. I'm a man who lends money to desperate people on hard terms and counts the profit at night and sleeps fine. But I went home and I couldn't close my book. 9 days I couldn't close it. And I don't know how to fix what's wrong with me except to do this, so I'm asking, let me put a floor in your house. Pine board, sanded smooth, like you were promised, and then you can throw me off your land and I'll have earned it." She stood there. The wind came across the yard, that dry, cold wind, and it pulled a strand of hair loose from her neat pinned hair, and she didn't fix it. That's how I knew I'd reached something. She let the hair go. She let me lay the floor. It took 2 days, and I want to tell you about those 2 days, because they were among the best of my life, and I didn't understand that they were until they were over, which is the way of the best days I've found. Joe worked beside me. The boy had never held a hammer that wasn't an axe, and he drove 4 nails crooked for everyone he drove straight, and he never once quit, never once let his face show the frustration I could see boiling in him. Just pried the bent one out with the claw the way I showed him and set another and tried again. There's a thing that happens to a man's chest when he watches a boy refuse to quit at a thing. I felt it the way you feel weather coming. The twins, Pell and her brother Sam, decided I was a marvel and followed me everywhere. Tess kept her distance. Tess was 13, and Tess had done the arithmetic on too many strange men to trust a wagon full of kindness. And she watched me work from the corner of her eye while she minded the baby, whose name I learned was Ruth, and who had, I want it recorded, the exact stubborn chin of her mother. And Naomi cooked. She cooked because I'd brought meal and bacon and flour, and a woman who has watched her children eat beans for a season will cook the first chance she gets the way another person might sing. The smell of bacon in that yard the first morning. I saw Sam stop dead in the dirt and just breathe it in, eyes closed, the way you'd breathe in spring after a long winter, and I had to go find something to do with my hands at the far end of the wagon for a minute. The second morning I dug the well deeper, or rather Joe and I did, him hauling the mud bucket up on the new rope while I dug at the bottom in the dark and the wet, and a little after noon the water came in clear and cold around my boots, and I hollered up the shaft, and I heard the children cheer above me, a sound that came down that hole like sunlight, and I stood in the cold water at the bottom of a dead man's well and put my face in my muddy hands for a minute where nobody could see. "Sarah, I know what you'd say." We laid the last board near dark on the second day. Naomi swept it, the new pine with the same broom she'd kept that dirt floor clean with, the habit so deep in her she did it without thinking. And then she stopped, the broom in her hands, and looked down at what she was sweeping, and understood that it was wood sanded smooth under her feet in her house after everything. She didn't cry then either. I begun to think the woman had no tears left in her, that the country had taken those along with everything else. She set the broom against the wall. She looked at the floor a long time. He always said pine, she said, very quiet, right up to the end. Whenever it got bad, he'd say, never you mind, Naomi, when my ship comes in. A breath. His ship never came in. Tom never finished one single thing he ever started in his life. And here she did a thing I didn't expect. She laughed, a small broken laugh, and there was no cruelty in it, only a terrible tenderness. And his floor's the first thing in this house that ever got finished, and he's not here to stand on it, and it took a man who came to take the house to build it. I didn't have anything to say to that. There wasn't anything. Why? She said. She turned and looked at me straight, and the question wasn't an accusation. It was just a woman who needed to understand the shape of the thing happening to her. You said you'd take the land. The papers are real. You could ride to town tomorrow and we'd be gone by spring and you'd have your creek. Why are you on your knees in my house laying my dead husband's floor? I'll tell you what I told her, because it was the truest thing I'd said to another soul since Sarah died. I lost my wife 12 years ago, I said, and the baby she was carrying, fever. Inside of a week I went from a man with a family to a man with a ranch, and I had money enough to fix everything except the one thing that was broke, and I have spent 12 years getting richer and counting it all up at night because counting is the only thing that ever made the quiet bearable. I looked at the floor, at the smooth pine. I rode in here 9 days back and I saw you feed your children first and yourself last, and I saw a girl mother her own sister to bed, and I saw a boy pick up an axe to defend a sod shack against a man with 9,000 head, and I went home to my big house with the wooden floor and the marble stone out back, and I lay there counting, and for the first time in 12 years the numbers didn't make the quiet bearable. They made it worse. I made myself look at her. I don't know what I owe you, Mrs. Calder. I've been trying to work it out and I can't make the columns balance, so I'm paying what I can figure how to pay. She was quiet for a long time. You don't owe me anything, she said finally. I know. That's not how debt works. I know that too, I almost smiled. Believe me, ma'am, I know exactly how debt works. It's the one thing I'm sure I understand. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and something passed between us in that swept, clean, pine-floored room that I am not going to try to put a name to, because some things a man cheapens by numbing them, and because I'd be lying if I said I understood it even now. It wasn't love. Not then. It was too early and we were both too broken for anything as simple as love. It was something more like recognition. Two people who'd each been carrying a grief alone for so long they'd forgotten the weight wasn't part of their own bodies, looking up for the first time and seeing the load on someone else's back. Then Pell tugged my sleeve and asked, with the bottomless gravity of a 4-year-old, whether the new floor was strong enough to dance on, and the moment broke, the way moments do, into ordinary life. I stayed for supper. Bacon and cornbread and beans, but the beans had bacon in them now, and Naomi ate her own full portion at the head of her own table on her own floor, and that her eating was the thing that finally got me, that I had to look at my plate over. I'd built a floor and dug a well and brought hens and a goat, and the thing that broke me clean in two was watching a starving woman finally let herself eat. I rode home in the dark, and I did not count the stores. The trouble came 4 days later, and it came from a direction I should have seen and didn't, because a man rarely sees the trouble that wears his own face. Bram Hollies rode onto the 3 rivers with 2 of his hands and a look I knew. We sat our horses in my own yard. He wouldn't get down, which told me the shape of it before he opened his mouth, and Bram Hollies said, in that big friendly voice he uses like a man uses a club wrapped in a blanket, "Elias, heard a funny thing in town. Heard you been hauling lumber and livestock out to the old Calder place." He smiled. "Bram has a lot of teeth. Heard you been playing nursemaid to Tom Calder's widow instead of serving the note you hold. Now that's a curious way for a businessman to behave, and I got to thinking, if Elias Vance don't want that Creek quarter bad enough to take it, well, maybe Elias Vance won't mind if somebody else buys up the note. I went cold. The note's mine, I said. Calder borrowed from me direct. There's no note to buy. There's a widow, Bram said, gentle as a snake, who's about to come into a deeded property the minute you file your papers, and a widow with no money and 5 mouths and a hard winter coming is a woman who'll sell a deed cheap to a man who offers cash money for the railroad east. Won't even have to be unkind about it. He gathered his reins. I'd hate to see you lose that creek frontage on account of going soft, Elias. We've been neighbors a long time. Just thought I'd give you the chance to do the smart thing first. Sign your papers, take the land, and let the woman go where she's going. That's the kind thing, even, quick and clean. Better'n what comes if you dither. He turned his horse. You think on it, he said. I'll be making her an offer Saturday either way. And he rode off, and left me standing in my own yard, understanding the trap with a clarity that made me sick, because it was a trap built entirely out of my own kind of logic, the cold accounting I'd lived by my whole life, and there was no good move in it. Here was the arithmetic, and I did it standing right there fast, the way my head does. If I served the papers and took the land, the smart move, the move I'd ridden out to make in the first place, I'd own the creek, Hollies would be shut out, and Naomi and her 5 children would be put off the only home they had, 6 weeks before winter, to make a wagon road east on whatever charity they could beg. Clean and legal and exactly what I'd intended 9 days before. If I didn't serve the papers, if I let the deed pass to Naomi as the widow, which the law allowed if I forgave the note, then come Saturday, Bram Hollies would ride out there with cash money in his fist and offer a desperate woman more than she'd see in 5 years, and she would take it, because she should take it, because a mother does not have the luxury of refusing the thing that gets her children through the winter. And Hollies would have his creek frontage pinching into my water, and I'd have lost the land, and Naomi would be gone east anyway, only with money in her pocket instead of without it. Either way she left. Either way the floor I'd built got walked away from. The only thing my choice decided was whether Bram Hollies or I ended up with the creek, and whether the woman went east poor or went east paid. That was the whole of it. I stood in my yard and ran it 3 times, and it came out the same every time. There was no version where she stayed. There was no column where it balanced. The land and the woman were 2 separate sums, and they could not both come right, and any man with a head for figures could see it. I went inside and I sat at my table on my smooth pine floor, and I took out the book, and I sat with the pencil over October's blank date for a long, long time. And then, very slowly, I understood that I had been doing the arithmetic wrong. Not the numbers. The numbers were right. I'd been wrong about what I was counting, wrong about it, I think now, for 12 years, and once I saw that, I saw there was a third move, a move that wasn't in Bram Hollies' arithmetic at all, because it would never have occurred to Bram Hollies, the same way it would never have occurred to the man I'd been a fortnight before. It was a move that would cost me the creek. It would cost me more than the creek. It would cost me a thing I'd guarded so long I'd mistaken it for my own spine. I'd have to ride out before Saturday. And I'd have to ask Naomi Calder a question, and I had no earthly idea whether she'd say yes. And I found, sitting there with the pencil shaking just slightly over the page, that her answer mattered to me more than any figure I had ever written in 11 years of writing figures in that book. I want you to understand what that means out here, because I've been telling you about cold the way a man tells about a thing he respects, and Friday the cold stopped being a thing I respected and became a thing trying to kill me. The norther came down off the high country a little after I left the 3 Rivers, a gray wall of it, the temperature falling so fast you could feel it on your teeth, and by the time I was halfway to the Calder place, the wind had teeth and the first hard pellets of snow were coming sideways, stinging like buckshot. Duke didn't want to go on. I don't blame him. There were stretches I couldn't see the ground in front of his feet, and I rode the last hour by the lay of the land and dead reckoning, and the thing in my chest that wasn't reason at all. A sensible man would have turned back. I had a head for figures, and I did the figures, and the figures said turn back. But Holly's was coming Saturday with cash in his fist, and I'd worked out that the only way to be sure I got to her first was to get to her before the storm closed the country entire. And so I put my head down into the wind, and I let the smart move freeze to death somewhere behind me on the trail. The light was failing when I came over the rise. I almost rode past the place, the snow had swallowed it, and then I saw the one thing that told me they were alive. Smoke, torn ragged off the chimney pipe the second it left, but smoke, which meant fire, which meant they'd got the wood in before it hit. The boy had got the wood in. Joe. I'd find that out later, that the boy had read the sky that morning the way I taught him to read a thing 2 days before. There's weather coming, son, you can smell it. And had spent the whole short day hauling and splitting and stacking against the wall by the door. A 10-year-old laying in fuel against a thing he'd never seen the size of, because somebody had to be the man of the place, and he decided he reckoned he had to be. He'd got enough. He'd got enough. I came into the yard half frozen to the saddle, and Naomi had the door open before I was down, the firelight behind her gone gold against the blue-gray dark, and the look on her face was not the wary arithmetic of that first day, and it was not the broken tenderness of the floor. It was plain terror, the terror of a person watching someone come in out of a thing that kills people. And she got under my arm and got me down off the horse, and Joe came out into that wind and took Duke without being asked. And I was inside, on the smooth pine floor in front of a fire, with 5 children staring at the snowman their floor had grown. She didn't ask me why I'd come until the children were asleep. That took hours. The storm howled at the sod, and the new-floored room held its little circle of warmth against it, and Naomi fed me. There was a stew now, the goat had freshened, and there was milk in it, and the bacon, and it was the best thing I have ever eaten in my life, and I have eaten at the tables of senators. And one by one the children went down on the pallets along the wall. Pell fought it. Pell wanted to stay up and look at me. Pell lost, the way the small always lose to sleep, mid-sentence, and Tess carried her over, and I watched the 13-year-old tuck her sister in on a pine floor instead of dirt, and I watched Tess's face when her knees touched the smooth board, the small involuntary thing that crossed it, and I understood that the floor had done something for the girl too that I hadn't intended and couldn't have named. Then it was just Naomi and me, and the fire and the storm. "You rode through that," she said, "the day before you'd have to. There's a reason. A man like you doesn't do a thing like that without a reason that's already worked out to the last figure." She looked at me across the fire. "So tell me the figure, Elias." She'd never used my given name before. I noticed it land. I noticed it the way you notice the first warmth of a thaw before you let yourself believe in it. So I told her about Holly's. I told her all of it flat, the way Coombs lays out a case, because she'd earned the truth without it dressed up. I told her Holly's was coming Saturday with cash money for her deed, that he'd offer her more than she'd see in years, that he wanted the creek to pinch into my water. I told her that the smart move, my whole life's move, was to ride to town and file the papers and take the land out from under both her and Holly's, clean and legal. I told her that the other move was to forgive the note and let the deed pass to her as the widow, and that the second she held that deed, Holly's would buy it off her, and he should, and she should sell, because a mother doesn't get to refuse the thing that carries her children through a winter, and either way I leave, she said. She'd got there ahead of me. Of course she had. She'd been doing this arithmetic since the day Tom didn't come home. Either way I go east. The only thing your choice decides is who gets the creek and whether I go poor or paid. That's what I worked out, I said. 3 times, same answer every time. It's the right answer. She said it without bitterness. She'd long since burned through bitterness. Just the flat accounting of a woman who'd run out of better answers years before. Sell to Hollies, take the money, get the children to my sisters before the baby's first birthday. It's more than I had Tuesday. It's a good deal. You should be glad of it. You taught Joe to read the sky, and you dug us a well, and you put down this floor, and that was kindness enough for one man. And now you've ridden through a killing storm to tell me there's cash money coming Saturday, which is the best news anybody's brought to this door in a year. So why? And her voice caught, the second hairline crack I'd ever heard in it. Why do you look like a man come to a funeral? Here is the thing I had worked out, sitting at my table over the blank date. I'd had the columns wrong for 12 years. Not the figures were always right. I never once added a thing wrong in my life. I'd had wrong what I was counting. I'd been counting head of cattle and dollars and acres and board feet and stars, counting and counting, because the day the fever took Sarah and the baby I'd learned that the things I loved could be taken in a week. And a man can't bear that. So I'd quietly stopped loving things that could die and started loving things that couldn't. Numbers don't die. A column closes the same every time. I'd built a whole life out of the one kind of wealth that can't break your heart, and I'd called it being a good businessman. And Sarah had seen it in me before she died and laughed at it because she loved me. You'd count the stars if the Lord held still. And then I'd ridden into a yard and found a woman who had nothing the ledger could measure, no cattle, no dollars, no acres worth counting, and who was, by any figure I knew how to keep, the poorest soul in the county. And she'd fed her children first and herself last. And a girl had mothered a baby. And a boy had picked up an axe and then a hammer, and then read the sky and laid in the wood. And I had stood in the middle of all that wealth I couldn't count, and understood that I was the poor one. That I'd been the poor one for 12 years. That I had 9,000 head, and a marble stone over an empty grave, and no living thing in all the world that needed me to come home. That was the third move, the one that wasn't in Hollies' arithmetic, the one that would cost me the creek and more than the creek. I don't want you to sell to Hollies, I said. Elias. And I don't want to file the papers and take the land. I made myself look at her. I forgave that note Wednesday night. Coombs has it in writing. The $460 Tom Calder owed me, it's gone, it struck off. There's no note for Hollies to buy and no debt for me to serve. The deed passes clean to you as the widow. The land's yours, Naomi, free and clear, whatever you decide tonight. That part's already done, and there's no undoing it. She went very still. That's the creek, she said slowly. You're giving up the creek to Bram Hollies after 20 years. I'm giving up the creek. Why? And here it was. The question I'd ridden through a killing storm to be allowed to ask. And now that I was in front of it, I found I had no smooth speech for it. None of the worn smooth confidence I'd carried into yards my whole life. Because this was the one figure I couldn't control the outcome of. And I'd never in my life staked anything on a number I couldn't control. Because I don't want you to go east, I said. I want. And my voice did a thing voices aren't supposed to do for a man like me. I have a big house with a wooden floor and glass in the windows and not one living soul in it but me. And it's got room. It's got more room than one man should be let to keep to himself while a woman freezes her children on a wagon road. And I'm not. I stopped. Started again because she deserved it true and not dressed. I'm not asking you what a man usually asks a woman. Or I am maybe someday if you ever came to it, but that's not the figure tonight. The figure tonight is just stay. You and the 5 of them come to the 3 rivers where there's water that doesn't run dry and a roof that's already finished and food enough that a mother never has to push her supper around the bowl again. As however you want it named. As my wife if it ever comes to that and you'd have me, which God knows you've no cause to. As my housekeeper, paid honest wages, if that's the only way your pride'll take it and you can call it work. As nothing at all but a widow and her children that a man with too much gave too late shelter to. I don't care what we call it. I've spent my whole life caring what things are called and counting them right, and it got me a house full of nothing. Name it whatever lets you say yes. Just don't go east. Don't make me ride home tomorrow and count the days till I hear you sold to Hollies, and took the children somewhere I'll never know if they made the winter. She was quiet for so long that the fire burned down a stage and Joe, in his sleep, turned over on the pallet. And I will tell you the thing she did, because it is the thing that tells you who Naomi Calder was, and it was not the thing a lesser story would have her do. She didn't cry, and she didn't fall into my arms, and she didn't say yes. She got up and put another piece of Joe's wood on the fire, and she stood with her back to me looking down into it. And when she spoke her voice was steady again, mortared over, the voice of a woman who had survived everything the country could throw at her by never once letting a man do her thinking for her. I knew a kindness like this once before, she said. Not the same, but the shape of it. A man with means and a smooth way of talking who came to a woman with nothing and said, "Let me take care of you, name it whatever you like, just say yes." She turned around. That man was Tom Calder. And I said yes, because I was 19 and frightened and he had a wagon and a plan. And I spent 14 years learning that a woman who lets a man's kindness do her deciding ends up exactly here, in a sod shack with 5 children and a rifle she can't fire, depending on the next man's kindness to live. Her chin came up, Ruth's chin, the baby's chin. I saw where the baby got it. I'll not do it again, not even for you. Especially not for you, because you're a far better man than Tom ever was, and that's exactly what makes it dangerous. Because a kind man's roof is the easiest place in the world to disappear inside of. I felt it go through me. She was right. I'd known she was right before she finished saying it. I'd offered her shelter and called it freedom and dressed it 3 different ways so she could pick the one that hurt her pride least, and she'd seen straight through to the bones of it, that every version I'd offered ended with her living inside my arithmetic, on my land, under my roof, depending on the goodness of Elias Vance the way she depended on the schemes of Tom Calder. "You're right," I said. "I didn't see it, you're right." And something eased in her face, because I think she'd expected me to argue, the way men argue, and I hadn't. "But," she said, "I waited. You forgave the note. The deed's mine, free and clear," you said. "There's no undoing it." "There's no undoing it." "Then I'm not a widow depending on a man's roof." She said it slowly, working it out aloud, and I watched her do it, watched the arithmetic happen behind her eyes, only it was a different arithmetic than I'd ever kept, a kind I didn't have the columns for. "I'm a woman who owns 900 acres with creek frontage, which is more than most widows in this country, and more than I had Tuesday." And the ghost of something crossed her face, the first thing close to a smile I'd seen on it, "which Bram Hollies wants badly enough to ride out here Saturday with cash." "He does." "And which you want to keep it out of his hands." "I do." "Then we're not talking about your kindness anymore, Elias Vance." And now it was a smile, thin and fierce and entirely her own. "We're talking about a deal, between 2 people who each own something the other needs. And that's a thing I can stand inside of with my back straight, because it isn't charity and it isn't a roof I'd owe my soul for, it's business. And I find I've got a head for business that 14 years married to Tom Calder never once got asked about." I sat there on her pine floor, and I started, very slowly, to understand that I was being out-traded by a woman who'd owned property for 2 days, and that it was the finest thing that had ever happened to me. We made the deal by the fire, while the storm spent itself against the sod. I'll not give you every figure, though I could. I have them all. I wrote them in the book before I left. The first thing I'd written in that book in near 3 weeks, and I did not write them under a closed column. I wrote them under a partnership, which is a thing the book had never held before. The shape of it was this. She kept the deed. Her land, her name on it, unduckable, hers to leave to the 5 of them. We'd run my stock and her grass together, her creek and my well, shares split honest down lines. Coombs would draw so tight that neither of us could cheat the other if we tried. And I'd build, with my own money and Joe swinging a hammer that drove straighter every week, a proper house up on her quarter near the creek. A house that was hers, not mine, with a pine floor and glass in the windows. and the children would have my well water that never ran dry and her land that no man could put them off of, ever. Because it was theirs. And as for the rest, the question I hadn't really asked, the wife I hadn't really proposed, she looked at me across the fire when the business was settled and she said, "As for the rest of it, we'll see. You'll court me proper like a man courts a woman who owns her own land, with no roof of yours hanging over the answer. And maybe in a year when there's no deal in it and no winter coming and nothing I need from you but you, I'll tell you yes or I'll tell you no, and either way it'll be mine to tell." She held out her hand across the fire to shake on the part that was business. "Is that a deal, Mr. Vance?" I took her hand. It was thin still and rough from the buckets and the cold, and it was the first living thing I'd held in 12 years that I wasn't afraid of losing, because she'd just shown me she could not be lost. She'd taken her nothing and turned it, by sheer straight-backed refusal to disappear, into ground that would hold. "It's a deal," I said. Bram Hollies rode out Saturday into a world gone white and still, the norther blown through, and the country buried clean and silent. And he came up the lane to the Calder place with cash money in his coat, and that big, friendly club wrapped in a blanket voice all ready. And he found me sitting on the step of a sod shack drinking coffee in the cold sun like a man who lived there. "I'll spare you most of it. There isn't much sweeter in this life than watching a thing you dreaded turn out the opposite of how you feared, and I'll confess I enjoyed it more than a reformed man ought to." Hollies offered. Naomi came to the door. She let him make the whole speech. "The cash, the railroad east, the better than what you've got now, ma'am," and she let him finish. And then she told him, polite as Sunday, that the land was not for sale, not Saturday and not ever, that she meant to die on it and leave it to her children, and that she thanked him kindly for riding all this way through the snow to tell her what her own ground was worth, as she'd half wondered. The look on Bram Hollies' face was a thing I will take to my grave and treasure there. He looked at her. He looked at me on the step. He did the arithmetic. Bram's not stupid. Bram does figures too, and he understood that he'd lost the creek to a partnership he hadn't known existed, brokered by a widow he'd taken for a sure thing, and that the only fool in the yard was him. "You've gone soft, Elias," he said, gathering his reins. "It was meant to wound." "No," I said. "I've gone rich, Bram. You wouldn't know the difference. I didn't either till lately." He rode off east into the snow, and we never did get the creek line moved, his way or mine, and that suited me down to the ground. That was 4 years ago, near enough. I'm writing this at the table in the new house up by the creek, her house, deed in her name, though I've a room in it now that the courting came to what the courting came to, which I'll let you guess at, because some figures a man keeps to himself. There's pine board under my feet, sanded smooth. There's glass in the windows and the cold light of a December morning coming through it, and somewhere out back I can hear Joe, 14 now, and tall, and a hand with stock that any outfit in the county would hire, hollering at Sam over something, and the goat that started it all, or her granddaughter anyhow, complaining at the cold. Tess writes a fine hand and keeps the books for the whole operation, hers and mine both, better than Coombs ever did, and I taught her the columns and she taught me the thing I'd had backward for 12 years, which is that a ledger is only worth keeping if you're honest about what belongs in it. Ruth, the baby, the one with her mother's chin, is learning to walk on a floor her dead father promised and never built, and a man who came to take it built instead, and she does not know any of that, and she will someday, because Naomi says the children will know the whole truth of where they came from, the hard parts too, especially the hard parts, because a thing built on a pretty lie is built on dirt. And the book, my old soft tally book, the one with 11 years of closed columns and the one blank date. I never did write a figure under October 31st. I left it blank. It's the only blank day in 23 years of that book, and Naomi knows what it is, and she's the only one I ever told, that it's the day I rode into a yard to count what I was owed, and found a woman with nothing left but 5 children, and could not, for the life of me, work out the sum. I still can't. That's the truth of it. I have tried these 4 years to put a figure to what I owed her and what she gave me back, and there is no number, there is no column wide enough, and I've made my peace with that, because some debts aren't meant to be closed. Some you just go on paying gladly every ordinary day, in coffee carried out to a step, and a girl's bookkeeping praised, and a boy taught to read the sky, and a baby's hand held while she finds her feet on a smooth pine floor.